Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar today from EPAY Systems on how to write an RFP and managing your buying process to help you make that decision. My name is Michelle Lanter-Smith and I am the Chief Marketing Officer here at EPAY Systems. And joining me is John Garayuso, our lead Senior Sales Engineer.
Yep. Hey everybody, thank you for joining us today. This is actually kind of an interesting topic for me and Michelle. It's not our norm, and it's actually like a little refreshing to do something a little different.
Yes, it is. We receive thousands of RFPs all the time and have to sort through them and work through them. And we see clients and customers that do it right and others that really struggle with the process. And oftentimes we are asked from our clients, how should we go about and do this? So this is basically what we've done is collected all of our learnings and what we share with people that ask us, and we're going to present it to you for the next hour. Now, we are going to open it up to questions, not using your voice, but using your fingers. So when you have a question, just go to the right-hand side of your screen, look for the box called questions, and type it in. And we will try to answer as many as we can as we go along. So what we're going to do in the next hour is I'm just going to briefly talk about EPAY Systems. We do have both customers and new folks on the line today, so I want to do that and take care of that little piece of homework. And then we're going to talk about what is an RFP, an RFI, RFQ, with the different reasons for them. Really, how do you plan for an RFP, the timeline, things you need to include, how do you evaluate and score, and then common mistakes that John and I see all the time. So we've got lots of tips to share with you. So we hope you enjoyed today. Well, who is EPAY Systems? We have been around since 2001. We're headquartered here in Chicago, Illinois, out of the Windy City. And we provide a fully unified HCM, or Human Capital Management, solution. That's HR technology, payroll technology, and time and labor management technology in a fully integrated solution. We serve hourly workforces, so we tend to work with clients that have a very complex workforce environment, typically distributed, might have people moving from site to site, location to location. It just causes all kinds of craziness. Shift differentials, paying people differently, overtime, difficulty in scheduling people, difficulty in getting the right collection devices so you can capture their time. So that's what we focus on, and we have always been in the time and labor management or the workforce management business since the very beginning. And what people like about us is really that flexible engine that we provide. And because of the flexibility, we can take care of and handle the very complex workforces. People also really like our support. We offer a 24/7, all year round support to everybody. We don't have a gold and a platinum service. Everybody gets free premium support, and that is for all of our modules within our human capital management platform, from payroll to time and labor to applicant tracking and so on. And because it's a 24/7 support, they're constantly getting their questions answered, we have a great retention rate with our clients. You can see some of our clients there, but we, of course, have many, many clients ranging from small to mid-size to enterprise clients. That's a little bit about EPAY. Let's get into our topic today. So, John, let's talk about the RFP and its very humble beginnings. What was the origin of it and how did it start?
Yeah, it really started out as a way to have a non-biased view into getting a bunch of different proposals all into one, so that the end user can evaluate them effectively, right? And have a way of looking at the data and identifying, hey, this is a good fit for me, or no, this one doesn't meet the bill, right? And if you look at the different types that are out there, an RFP and an RFQ, very similar, right? Request for proposal or request for quote. You're looking to identify a vendor of choice that way because you're getting pricing on that. You're looking to get that information so that you can actually make a decision on a particular product. An RFI is slightly different. That's typically the first start of an RFP process, especially when you look at a government entity. they're going to go in and do an RFI first, just part of their process and how they have to handle that. With the RFI, you're not really looking for pricing in there. You're looking more to gather information about different vendors, or you may not know anything about what you're trying to buy, and you're just trying to gather additional information so that you can become educated about that. And that's what you typically see in RFI. Now, an RFI is a short form of an RFP, right? So when we look at RFP or RFQ versus RFI, you're typically seeing the RFI as a short version. It's not as many questions. Everything is more high level. Whereas an RFP, you're looking at very specifics because you have your own specific needs. You want to make sure you meet those requirements, and we'll talk more about how to look at some of that stuff later on here.
So you mentioned government contracts, and in the government world, we see an RFI first, then they go out, get their funding, and then you see the RFP. What do you think is, besides that, what do you think is the difference in terms of government versus commercial, this whole process, I should say?
So government has very strict policies on how they have to essentially buy from the public, right? They have to go out for quotes, right? And that first process is doing an RFI, and that's really for them to identify particular vendors that are going to fit the bill, right? And then from there, once they've created that RFI and they've gotten responses back, they now have their initial data to go back and say, hey, we need a budget for this. These are the reasons why, right? And then they move it over into an RFP so that now they get the proposals and the quotes, and that way they can finally get into that end decision, select a vendor, have their contract negotiations, and then make that announcement of who that actual vendor is for that RFP.
Yeah. Now on RFIs, what do you typically see, or what is best practice? Should you ask for pricing information on an RFI?
On an RFI, you typically don't see pricing information on an RFI. It doesn't mean that you can't ask for it, but expect it to be a very high level because you're keeping it very short, right? Again, you want to make it a short process for that. So don't expect the pricing to hold true when it gets to an RFP where there's more detail, and now we start to uncover more things that need to be done, and there's more additional costs that weren't in the insight of that RFI.
Well, let's kind of get into the meat of things and talk about what you need to do to ensure the success of a good purchase process, I guess, and the overall timeline. How long does the whole thing tend to take from what you're seeing with your clients?
What I typically see, especially in the HCM industry, is we typically see about a 2 to 3 month turnaround from a project planning point of view, meaning you're trying to figure out what do we need, right? You're planning out your needs, you're drafting up your RFP, which is giving you all the information. We'll talk more of what's included in there in a little bit here too as well. To going out to sharing it to the different vendors, to the vendors responding, and then you're going in and doing reviews and also doing demos, and then you're into your final decision, right? So it takes about a 2 to 3 month time frame to actually go through that entire process if you're doing it effectively. Now, I'm speaking from HCM. It could be shorter for other pieces of software, right? And part of it just depends on the complexity of what you're buying, and that's really going to determine what that timeline is going to be. But you need to make sure you do your planning, right? Because that's very important. And anything that you do, really, when I kind of look at this as, you're creating a report from scratch, define what you want, right? And that's kind of what I look at this as an RFP. You have a project, define what you want, but then also give the pieces of information that are needed so that you can get the right responses and have a good way of identifying who's a good vendor and who's not for you.
Okay. Well, when it's time to get started, let's look at what are the first few steps you got to do to get going.
One, you want to define who your point of contact is, right? Who's going to be that go-to person where all the vendors go to ask questions, to send out communication to the vendors, to really be that facilitator of, even down to the demo stage of this is what's expected, this is we're scheduling, etc. Have one point of contact. Don't have multiples because you're going to end up having too many mixed information from too many different people, right?
Absolutely.
You also want to have a selection committee too. So it's not just one person makes the decision. You want to have stakeholders that are part of that process who are going to be using that piece of software. You want them as part of that selection committee because they're ultimately going to be using it. You want their buy-in. So you want them to have a say in, yeah, this is going to work for us, or no, this isn't going to work for us. Because if you leave it up to one person or one group that they don't know everything that goes on in every department and how that's going to work for that particular department, right? That's why you put together a committee. Now, it doesn't have to be a 50-man committee, right? You still want to keep it to a small group, but just make sure you have key stakeholders as part of that. You also need to set up your timelines, right? And you want to identify, hey, this is when we're starting the project. This is when we're expecting the RFP to be sent out. This is the time frame for questions. This is the time frame for responses. This is a time frame for reviewing and selecting finalists for demos, etc. So you want to set up what your due dates are so that everybody knows what to expect. It holds you accountable to those dates. It also holds the vendors to those dates as well, right? Also set up your budget parameters. Get an idea for what you're willing to spend for the project as well. Because if you find out that, hey, all of these are way overpriced, we don't have a budget for it, then this project can't exist, right? Or I need to go and figure out how to get more funding to actually make this work, right? And finally, you do want to do research on various vendors. You can, if you ever watch What We Do in the Shadows, Google it, right? You can go in and find vendors in different industries. It's easy to do those searches to find them. But then you also, it's not enough just to find the vendors and say, hey, they do this, right? Call them, talk to them, get some product brochures on them, do a little research of your own about that company and see are they really a vendor that might work for me, or am I wasting my time with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. You definitely want to call those vendors, get your salesperson at each vendor. Yes, you're gonna have to talk to a salesperson, but you need that contact because you'll see down the road why you need that contact, because you're going to have to be able to send them your RFP. You also need to, like John said, you got to get that budget information. Otherwise, you really don't have a clue what kind of questions or what kind of criteria you need to give them so that they can give you a price properly if you don't understand how this piece of software prices.
Right, and that's also why it's important to talk to the vendors too ahead of time so that you can understand these are the pieces of information that's needed to price it out. Because if you don't know and you're just saying, give me a price, you kind of want to know how are people pricing it. That way I can set up some sort of a form factor of identifying pricing so I can look at everything evenly across the board.
Absolutely. So you got to get educated. The other thing, too, I thought of that we don't have on here but is a good thing is when you meet with that committee, and whoever the point of contact is probably typically the leader of this whole process. You do need a leader because there's just too much coordination and decision-making and to be done. But you need to spell out, probably from an executive champion, what is the vision? What are we trying to do here? What are we trying to accomplish? So that everybody's on the same page. Because as you have different stakeholders involved, people have their own priorities based on what they're looking for. And so you need the executive to say, now, this is why we are looking at this and doing this RFP, and this is what the company needs to accomplish. So these are our goals. This is how you need to go forward. And then after that executive speaks, probably establish some ground rules in terms of when you're talking to vendors and you're seeing demos and things like that. We'll talk more about that. But I think that executive championship and vision is very important so that everybody gets on the same page. Okay, so let's get a little bit more into project planning. What do you think is better, John? Do you start today and say, okay, based on what we need to do, we can have a go-live date this time, or do you start with your desired go-live date and work backwards?
For me, I think it's important to start with your go-live date. When do you want to start? When do you want to have this piece of product live and up and running, right? And when you can decide on that, you can work your way back and identify, okay, it's going to take approximately, a month for negotiations. It's going to take a week for the final announcement, et cetera. So you can work your way back and identify, is my go live date rational, right? Is it something that can be met or not? And if it can't be met, now I know that, now I can see, okay, this is what it's going to take. Now I can figure out exactly, okay, I need to move everything by a month or two because it's a couple extra months than I originally thought it would be once I actually did that planning. So that's why I think looking at it from the go live date first is the best practice, so that you can work back and say, yeah, I'm in line with this, or no, I'm not, I got to push it out. And if you do have to push it out, then now you have your new go live date as well.
Yeah. So in this, you talk about, you're going out, you're distributing your RFP in the first one, you set the date, let's say you get a bunch in, right? But then look at that bullet number 4, vendor finalist notifications. So, and then you go on from there. So what is maybe the right amount that you kind of want to start with, and then what do you want to narrow it down to through this process?
So you don't want to have 30, right? That's just too much information to look at. Mm-hmm. You want to keep it to a big enough group where it's manageable, because what happens is when you get too much data, and you're trying to look at too much data, you end up putting things together that aren't there, right? So if you keep it to about 5 to 7 vendors to start with, and you narrow it down to 3, you're looking at small chunks of data to make your decision. So it becomes more manageable in terms of, I don't have to communicate with 20 people, I only have to communicate with 5 to 7 people. And guess what? There may be vendors that say, you know what, there's things in this RFP that we can't meet, we're out. Guess what? You have the ability to go in and find a replacement for them, right? So keeping it at that small amount is really your best bet, because the other thing is that you have to review all this information as well, right? It's not just they fill out an RFP and then all of a sudden, by magic, I know who the right vendor is. No, you have to go through that data, and we'll talk about how to manage that in a more effective way as well here in a little bit, by using scorecards to really help identify that, just to make it easy on yourself, right? And we'll talk about some of that stuff here in just a little bit as well.
So what happens, though, if you don't get enough in the initial request for proposal?
Well, the great thing about this is that this is your RFP, right? You have the ability to make a modification, but you have to be fair about it, right? So if you say, hey, I only had 2 people respond, I'm really looking to have at least 5 people. Obviously, you want to go out and find those additional vendors, but that may also have you push out, when responses are due, because now you're finding these new vendors and pushing it out. You want to be able to extend that out and let the vendors know ahead of time, more than just the day of, that, hey, we're extending it out, right? It's that common courtesy of, hey, this is what's happening, we haven't seen enough responses, and we're extending it out.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit about then actually putting that RFP together. What are some of the key components that you see over and over again that tend to work nicely?
So what I find that's great is that you want to give an introduction about your company. What does your company do? What's some of your core values? Because sometimes you're looking at core values of your vendor as well as core values from you to make a right match, right? So you want to see that type of information. You also want to give a purpose. Why is this going out to RFP? Why are we doing this, right? We also want to give scope of works to identify, this is what we're trying to get out of this piece of software, right? And then you also give them the schedule of dates. You can include an NDA or confidentiality statement in there. Also give them clear-cut instructions on how you want that RFP to be constructed, but don't make it so convoluted. I saw one, it was last month, that I read through it. I had no idea how they wanted to construct the RFP in response form back to them, right? Make it clear for the vendor and let them know that this is how we want to see it come back. And there's great ways of doing that. One is, and we'll talk about again this more a little bit later, but you can have a PDF with your introduction and company profile and all of that. and then you give them an Excel spreadsheet to fill out for everything that they need to fill out, right? And then also tell them which order it needs to go in. If it's, if you have additional documents that need to be signed off on, tell them which order you want to see it. That way, again, it's that same process for everybody. Everybody's got all the same information. You're all looking at it the same. Just follow those things, right? But you actually also need to know about that vendor profile. You can ask for financial information. Don't expect it to get it from privately held companies. It's something that they're willing to give it to you, but they're not going to give it to you on an RFP, right? And they'll typically give it to you later on in the process if they are a finalist. But don't let that scare you if they don't give you their financial information. It's just, if they're privately held, they kind of hold on to that as closely as possible, right? Now you also need to know and add in there product functionality. Can the product function or have the functionality that I need, right? So you're spelling out exactly what your needs are. We'll talk about that when we look at scorecards and functionality and how to process that. Also, you may want to know about their technology and security processes and things like that. Also important is what's their implementation strategy, right? And again, the more information you give, the better they are to include an implementation timeline for you that's specific for you based off of what they're seeing right now today. Now, that is an estimate. Things change, right? New customers are being added on, implementation teams shorten up with resources, so you can expect, at least the time frame in terms of the number of days or weeks or whatever it is to accomplish it, stay the same, but maybe the dates change slightly, right? And you can work with your vendor to get as close to that go live date as possible. But part of that is also the vendor has to look at when your expected go live date is and your decision process and identify that, yeah, this is a feasible time frame to implement, or no, it's not. You need to extend it out, and they need to be upfront and honest with you on that as well, right? And then customer references. This is not something. It's not something to expect a customer or a vendor to give to you in an RFP. And plus, you're not calling on those references anyways if they haven't made it to the finals, right? When they get to the finals, ask for customer references then, right? And at that point, have the vendor facilitate the call for you as well. Not that they're going to be on the call, but have them say, hey, let's schedule that call for me with these references. That way you let them facilitate that call and schedule it out for you without you having to reach out to that reference, because vendors don't want to bug their customers for customer references. And when you add it to an RFP and they have no idea when this is going to happen, you can give them a warning that, hey, I included you as a reference for this RFP, but don't expect a call, until a couple months out, right? That's not fair to that customer. They're going to forget because that's not as important for them. But also, you may never call them anyways. So set the expectations that, hey, if you make it into the finals, expect for you to give us customer references, and then also we expect you to kind of facilitate that to schedule those out, right?
Yeah, what you can do with this section, instead of in the RFP asking for these specific names, ask about their install base. How many customers do you have? Where are they located? Which industries, verticals? Don't expect that they have 100% of your type of industry that they're doing. There might be serving multiple, but it's nice to understand which industries they play in, because that'll tell you the skills of their people behind the software and what they know. So that's really what I would do with that one.
Yeah. And then obviously pricing and cost expectations, right? Because you need to know what this is going to cost you, right?
Right.
So you need to obviously include that in the RFP process as well. And again, the more data you give the customer, the better they can price it for you.
What about training? Where would you ask them to explain training?
I would explain training in the implementation process, because that's going to really be where the training should happen. Training shouldn't happen after go live. Training should happen pre-go live, where people are getting trained on the system so that they're getting comfortable with it. And that's going to be during that implementation process.
It is nice to understand what kind of training is available to you afterwards, because you're always going to have people leave and you want to be able to retrain them. So the training is important. So just to emphasize a couple points, that introduction and company profile is very critical, as John said, because that's where the vendors are going to understand your configuration, and they can envision how their solution will meet your requirements, because they've seen your type of company over and over again. So you give them some key facts about your number of employees and your sites and your locations and so on and so on. It depends on the RFP. That's important. It's probably also what they're going to use to price their proposal off of, and so that's important. Whatever you've learned in your initial research of how they price, make sure you're giving them those criteria in the introduction and the company profile piece. And then the other thing is, when you ask them for pricing, different vendors price different ways. They may price by seat, they may price by per employee per month, by license, or whatever. And that will get really hard for you when you're trying to evaluate one person's price over another. So use something that can't change, such as, what's my bottom line monthly cost? You know, that then, to make sure that they explain that to you, so that if I have X number of employees and you're selling by seat, then I know my monthly cost is this. Or if it's some other way, it's what is the monthly cost? But get to that monthly cost so that you have a very definite number that you can compare from one vendor to another.
Right. And you may also want to include what's the first year cost, second year cost, third year cost, or things like that. Because if they have maintenance fees that are yearly or things like that, you want to know that, again, so that you can compare things side by side and understand exactly, yeah, this is what the cost is going to be, or this is higher or lower, and I have something that's comparable from one to another.
All right, well, we're going to dive more into the whole product functionality and how do you get that information back, because that's obviously the key part of the RFP. So how do you recommend setting it up, John?
So the way I like to see this when I'm reviewing an RFP, and I'll give you the reason why I like to see it this way, is I like to know what's required, what's a nice to have or love to have, and what's a like to have, right? So, and the reason for that is that when I'm going through that process, I start to understand more about your business. So it's not just that front information, number of employees, and all that other, what's my company do and all that. It's also when you're looking at the features as a vendor, you're starting to identify, okay, this is what they're looking for, right? Now you can start to form a basis of everything that they're looking for. And it's also letting the vendor know, these are things that are very important to me, right? This is required. And say I have 100 things that are required, and I can only do 50 of those, right, as a vendor. You know what that tells me? This is probably not a good fit. I'm going to bow out, right? And that's why it's nice to show that information, because, again, that vendor is starting to know more about your business and what kind of functionality you're looking for, and what you're telling them, this is required, this is a nice to have, right? And so it's helpful for the vendor. It's also helpful for you, because you know what's required for you, and you can also score these in the right way as well.
Yes, very important piece. So when you set it up like this, you need to get even more information than from the vendor on the feature set that they're providing. How do you recommend they answer your requirement statements?
So have a set of, obviously this is part of the instructions, right? You want to set what are the values when they're actually filling out that sheet, right? Is it standard to the system? Is it on a roadmap? Is it not developed yet, but it is on the roadmap? Is there some customization that's going to be needed? I've even seen some that are, it's configurable by the customer, right? So again, this is up to you and how you want them to respond. But these are some of the ones that I see that are good. It just helps identify, yeah, this is standard to our system. It's great. Move on. Future to the roadmap, customizations, and they're going to fill out the codes there, right? The comments allows that vendor to extrapolate on something that says, you know, it's a future on the roadmap. Okay, great. When is it due?
Mm-hmm.
That's something that you can actually ask and have as part of the instructions and say, hey, if it's future, indicate when it's expected to come out, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or if it's a customization, you know, describe what that customization might look like, right? So it gives you that additional information. And you may see something that says that they answer a standard, they still enter a comment because they want to clarify it.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes that requirement, it's a gray area. It's not simply a yes or no, it's, yeah, it can work, but it works in this way,
mm-hmm.
right? It's still really a standard feature, but as a vendor, I want you to know this ahead of time because I feel it's important for you to know that this is how we're going to handle it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So,
Okay.
So from this point, let's put ourselves in a scenario, right? And now we have, let's say, 6 different RFPs came in. You now have to take what the product functionality, this spreadsheet of all these requirements, and how the vendors answered them, and you have to do some sort of scoring.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to basically come up with a number, but not everything is created equal here, right? So if you look at the top box, if something is standard, all right, they say it's standard in the system, and you've said it's required, you got to have, that's worth a lot of points. Whereas something that you would just like to have, and maybe you would have to have it customized and spend money on it, it's not worth, it's lesser points. It's not as ideal.
Right.
So there's a lot of ways to do this. This is just one idea, one recommendation of how you could score all of these coming back on this product functionality piece. And you can see here, we awarded points based on this table. So if you've said this feature I love to have, which is that middle column, would love to have it, not required, but would love it, and the vendor comes back and says, well, it's going to be on our roadmap in the next 6 months, well, that's worth some points. So that's worth 4 points. Whereas if you said it's love to have and they've got it today, that's worth more points to you. So it's a 5.
Yeah, I mean, essentially what you're doing, and this is going to sound technical, but you're creating an algorithm, right?
Mm-hmm.
But the great thing about Excel is that, and we'll talk about why Excel is so powerful for these, is that you can create this, essentially this algorithm. It's just a calculation of saying, hey, if it's standard, it's required, it's this points. You can even say that, hey, if it's required, it's this many points. It's a love to have. It's this many points. You know, this is the highest point total. If it's a like to have, this is the highest point total. And then you can say, by the way, and have Excel calculate all this. You know, if it's standard, it's 100% of the points. If it's future, it's 80% of the points. If it's customizations, it's 40% of the points, or whatever that is. So you have the ability to adjust that based on what you want that to be. But ultimately, what you're doing with the scorecard is you're making it easy on yourself. Too many times I've seen RFPs come in, and the vendor is just looking at question and answer, the entire RFP. One, I hate filling those out. Right?
We just got to get it out there, right?
I know. I absolutely, as a vendor, I hate filling it out. And I can only imagine the person on the other end reading it, they have to read through 5 of these, and these could end up being 20, 30 pages each. That's a lot to go through, right? So when you actually create these scorecards and have the vendor just fill out, you know, hey, this is a standard feature, you know, et cetera, and you assign these points to it, what you're ending up doing is you're actually creating a very non-biased view into the vendor and identifying, hey, these are my total points possible. This vendor has 18. Guess what? They're number 2 on my list. Another vendor has 20 points, right? So it allows you to identify, based off of my point totals, this vendor is going to work out very well for me based off of my requirements, whereas these bottom 3, you know, they're at 7 points. That's really not going to work out for me. I can eliminate people very easily just by looking at their score,
right?
Without having to read a novel 5 times.
Exactly. Yes. So definitely something to be learned from us seeing so many of them and how some people are just asking for a lot of pain.
Yeah. It's okay too to ask, hey, give an overview of this portion of the product, right? It's okay to ask for that, but that's more for just added bonus to identify, okay, this is what it feels like, or how they're explaining it, and then now these are the requirements, can they handle them, right? You still want to ask those requirements, can you do this? Yes, great. No, you can't, okay, great. You score it in an appropriate way, just makes it easier for you to evaluate, 5 vendors or 5 to 7 vendors versus reading those novels.
And there's really no reason to ask them anything that you can't read on their website either. So, and I'm not just saying that because it's a vendor, but if you ask them basic questions, their marketing people will just basically cut and paste it from marketing collateral, which you can read somewhere. That's, again, why you have to get down to the feature set and get into things that are not covered on public places. Right?
And that's also why you might do an RFI first before the RFP, because you just don't know what those feature sets you're looking for. And that's why you would do an RFI where it's just more general. You're not awarding anybody any contracts there. You're just gathering information. Right.
So from here, once you you basically take your card and you figure out for everybody what their points are on each requirement, so each line item, and then you total it up. And then you're going to total it up by each section. So, for instance, in a human capital management RFP, and I know some of you are in the webinar today because you're looking at RFPs for other areas, but take each section of your RFP and do a total points possible, what's possible there, and a total points what they earned. Right? So you have it for each section, because you're probably going to want to refer back to that. Where did they score high? Where did they score lower? Which categories of your RFP?
Yeah, and that's also important to identify too. Okay, well, this is their strong suit. They hit every point possible in this particular category. And then you can also add weighted averages to it as well, because maybe certain functionality or sections should be weighted more than others, right? And you can actually create that. Again, Excel is great for this, to be able to just do these calculations for you. But you can also do weighted averages to get you a point total that way as well.
Exactly. So from here, just staying kind of on the left-hand side, you basically need that to read your RFP, and you read your product functionality and how they've done, right? Ideally, you've done it on an Excel spreadsheet, you've got that. So, but we wanted to take it just a little bit farther from you, because you want to look at the whole thing, and you're going to evaluate them on other things besides that functionality. You're going to evaluate them. So now I'm looking at the right-hand box. You're going to evaluate them on price. You're going to evaluate them on maybe service, training, education. You're going to evaluate them on the demo that you ask them to see sometime. And you're going to evaluate them on their basic vendor profile. What's their install base like? Are they easy to do business with? Are they located in your geography? Whatever is important to you. So you're going to have these different categories. And as John was just saying, that's probably where you want to do your weighting. And oftentimes vendors will tell us, not vendors, excuse me, companies will tell us what their weighting score is going to be. They'll tell us the rubrics. Those of you that have children in school, they get a rubrics for every research paper they do. They'll tell you what the rubrics is going to be. So if price is like a major decision, tell them. If it's service, if it's function, whatever. You don't have to disclose this, but some do. So then you weight each one. Now, what we did here in this example, as you can see, we took the score out of the product functionality one that John just walked you through, and they had a score, this vendor had a score of 451. So that's the points they received. Follow the blue line, the blue row here, 451 points in product functionality. And we weighted it at 25% of the overall category. So then it really is only worth 112.75 points, okay? And that's how then you can do that. Now, we gave you an indication of how to figure out product functionality. We don't have time today to say, okay, how do you give them scores for pricing? How do you give them scores for service and demo and so on. But you need to decide that up front, right? What are you going to look at pricing? Is it just bottom line price, monthly cost? Is it contract length? Whatever. So look at that. When it comes to demo, have your demo piece of paper for all your stakeholders ready so that they know what they're listening for during the demo to check off for, and that you can get a score. But what's key is that then you can apply the weights, and you can come up with total scores so that you can decide who is better or not better. Okay. All right. So we talked about a lot of things, but this is kind of a nice summary to do do's and don'ts. What are the top ones that come to your mind?
Like I said about the question and answer, don't do that. Please don't do that. Like I said, it's not fun for the vendor. It's not fun for you to read through all of that. When you send out your RFP, the portions that you want somebody to fill out, don't send it out in a PDF form, right? It's hard for people to export that out to Word, to Excel, to get it in the right formats for you. So it's okay to set out your instructions and your company profile and that information in a PDF, and quite frankly, that should probably be sent out in a PDF because you don't want them changing that. Mm-hmm. But anytime they're filling something out, you know, have them do it out of an Excel spreadsheet. That's the easiest way. As we talked about that scorecarding, it's the easiest way to do scorecards for them as well based off of product functionality. Just makes it very easy. You know, using Word, you're not going to get that type of, you know, access to be able to do formulas in there and things like that. And if you can do it, it's very tedious and cumbersome. It's just a lot easier to do it out of Excel. Also, excuse me. There are other formats as well. You know, we talked about Excel to be able to have them fill it out. There are tools online that you can actually use. A tool that I've used in the past is RFP 365, where you can upload your entire RFP in there. So it'll give the instructions, it'll do the weighting for you, it does all of that for you, all on that, all online. And you can actually just send out that link out to the vendors to let them know that, hey, there's an RFP out here, right? Don't just use out-of-the-box templates, because, and this is a common mistake I've seen is RFPs have come in, and I'm reviewing things, and I see that this customer is asking, this is just an example, but they're asking, you know, how do you handle global payroll? Mm-hmm. And I go to their website and I see that they're nowhere near anything in terms of global, in terms of payroll. Why are you asking this question? Right? And, you know, you ask them that, I'm like, you know, do you have global payroll? And they say, no, that was just something that was out of a template. I'm like, okay, well, read through what you're using, right, and remove what's not important.
Because you confuse your vendors, exactly, and you get bad responses.
Exactly. You know, customize your sections that include things that are important for you. Take the time to identify what your requirements are versus your like-to-haves or nice-to-haves and things like that. You know, and like we said, don't be afraid to use cloud software tools for uploading that data as well.
Okay. Well, once you do that, you got to get the word out that you want people to respond to the RFP. How do you see it come across your desk?
So there's different ways, right? So one, an email can be sent out to the different vendors, but again, you want to research who that contact is, right?
Who's your salesperson?
Right, because ultimately they're going to be responsible for that RFP and making sure it gets completed. They may not be the ones filling out that RFP, but they're going to be in charge of ensuring that it gets back to you, okay? Post it out on your webpage. Make an announcement on your webpage. You know, have it out there so that anybody can sign up for it. Don't let that be the only way that people find out, right? No. Talk about researching and creating a list of vendors.
That's the best. That's the way you got to do it.
It is the best way. Yeah. identify who that contact person is for each vendor, right? Who are you sending it out to? Who are you going to be following up with? Try to make it as easy as possible to find. Maybe even share it on social media as well. Hey, we have an RFP out there. Follow up too, right? That's also also important to follow up with the vendors and say, hey, it's a few days before. I haven't heard anything from you. Do you have any questions, right? Excuse me. Also important is identifying, is the vendor going to respond or not, right? Because the sooner you can find that out, the sooner you know whether you have to find a replacement or not, right? So, follow up with them and find out, hey, are you going to respond or not? And make it fair, right? If you do have to do a replacement, you want to extend it out, make it fair. Give that new vendor the time to properly fill out that RFP. There are so many times I've seen RFPs come in and they're due 2 days later, and it's hard for companies to fill those out in that type of time frame, right? So if that does happen, be sure to be nice and extend it out and extend everybody's due date. Okay. Obviously, it's going to change your timeline a little, and again, it's okay. It's your RFP. You can make those modifications.
So one thing that happens often is the vendors have questions. Yeah. How do you think is the best way to handle questions?
Personally, I think it's better. So one, you have your point of contact, right? So having that point of contact where all those questions come to is important, because now you have just one person facilitating it versus multiple people, right? Identify when the questions are due, the last time somebody can ask a question, right? And when you do that, you're able to gather all the questions, and then you send out one email to everybody, letting everybody know what the responses are to all those questions. Fair playing field, right? That's what we're looking for with an RFP, is a fair playing field. You want to have all the answers and all the questions that were asked by all the vendors. You want to know those all of those responses as well. Another thing you may even think about is having set time periods where you hold an actual meeting, and all of the different vendors can show up and they can ask their questions live right there and then, right? It's another thing that can be done. Ultimately, it's up to you on how you want to handle those questions. You may start to get questions after that due date, and guess what? If you're getting a lot of questions, you can extend that question period out, but again, make sure everybody knows this, right? It's creating that equal playing field so that everybody knows that, hey, we've just extended questions out an extra 5 days. Please get all your questions in, and we'll be sure to get them answered. And let them know how quickly you're going to answer those questions as well, right? So if it's, hey, it's due by, all the questions are due by 11:30, and we're going to respond to them by December 3rd, right? Let them know what they can expect. It's just that courtesy, again, to let them know that, yeah, we're taking this serious, and we're going to respond to your questions in this time frame.
Because oftentimes they can't put their solution together until those questions are in. Correct. They usually play a huge role. And vendors want to not only get their questions answered, they want to see what other people are asking.
Right. And sometimes those questions come in because they're being used for pricing purposes as well.
Right, yeah. Well, we're getting close to the top of our hour. I think this slide really helps wrap up a lot of the things that we talked about today. You want to just summarize some of the key things you want to make sure everybody on the phone walks away with?
Yeah. So obviously, important piece is actually, planning out your RFP, right? And then it's actually finding the right vendors, right, and sending the RFP out to those vendors. Then it's actually scoring the vendors and how you can score them and appropriately identify in a non-biased way who's the right vendor, or who's a right likely choice for a vendor in here, right? Select your finalists, plan those finalists to do demos, right? Have scheduled timeframes for those demos. Don't schedule demos back to back. Don't schedule demos on the same day. The reason for that is that if you're going to a demo one right after another, you're going to meld or or merge things together that you shouldn't. You really want to have that clear-cut distinction between the two, because your person that's evaluating, even though you're giving them a sheet to evaluate, they may think, oh wait, did I see that in this or did I see that in the other one? So it becomes hard for them to really evaluate that, right? And then, finally, when you select your finalists, request those customer references at that point. Have that vendor facilitate those calls with those references as well to make it easy for you, right? Put the onus back on the vendor to set that up for you.
Exactly. I think talking about references, we actually do have a slide on it for those of you that want to kind of keep some of these tips. We will send out the slides to everybody on the line. But definitely, get those references. It's kind of like the just in time. When you're ready to talk to the key people, your final selections, go get those references at that time.
Yeah. Something that I've seen being used more and more is actual video references as well, right?
Yeah.
So it's not so much that you get to ask them questions, but you get to see that, ahead of time, hey, this is a reference, this is what they have to say about the company. And that's also good because you get to see the person that's giving that reference, and they're telling you about how they've experienced that vendor, right? I'm not telling you to not, call a person up to do a reference that way, but just consider doing a video reference as well as a separate option.
Mm-hmm. Now, when it comes to the vendor presentations, what are some of the tips that you have there? 'Cause, man, those can be tiring.
Yeah, so I've seen customers that they have a scripted demo. They tell you, this is what I want to see and this is when I want to see it. Guess what? Your vendor knows how to demo the product. They know how to have it flow from one to the other to make it look in its best light, and that's ultimately what you're trying to see. Yes, you want to see certain pieces of functionality. That's why you have a questionnaire for each person that's in that demo, so that they can mark off, yes, I saw this, or no, I didn't. But also give them a requisite of, these are the things that we're looking to see in a demo, right? But don't tell them exactly how they're going to demo it to you, right? Because you still want to give them the freedom to present to you in the best light possible, right? Because that's their time to shine. But also, they're going to make sure that they mark off that, yeah, I hit this point, I hit this point, I hit this point, I hit this point, right? And by giving them, hey, these are, and you can just specify the requirements that you're looking for as well. Let them figure out how to demo to you, right? Because that's really on them to figure that out. Ask for them to record it as well so that you can go back to it, right? You may not have all the people in the room for the presentation, right? Record it.
Right? That is critical, because after you hear 3 or 4, you're going to get confused. But if you have a recording to hear it again, it can really be the make or break of, did you make the right decision selection or not? Right.
You also want to identify how are we going to handle questions during the demo, right? And what you can suggest are time frames for the kind of say that loosely. You can suggest time frames for different things to cover, but if the vendor comes back and tells you, no, actually it's going to take me this much time to do this, go with that. But you can work questions for each one of those sections and just have time frames. Say, hey, once we get to the end of this section, it's 5 minutes of questions, right? Or you can say, hold all questions until the end, and then we're going to ask those questions, right? And if you leave it till the end, to me, I kind of have mixed feedback with that. If you have somebody who, I don't know what the right word is, but they're kind of take over the meeting and they're just asking question after question after question. If you have somebody like that, then maybe waiting until the end is the best choice for that.
Right.
Because you don't want to derail the demo based off of that one person asking a million questions.
And there are people that will do that, and then your other stakeholders don't get enough time in their section.
Right. I don't know the best way of saying that. But.
Yes.
And we talked about everything on this slide.
So it goes down to know your audience and know your selection committee and how you think they're going to act and what their behavior is going to be during the demos.
Yeah, and that'll help you decide how you're really going to handle questions. Just let the vendor know, how the questions are going to be handled. And the vendor may tell you, like, hey, you know what, I prefer to have all questions at the end of the demo. Just
because they might be on a roll on it, or they may be presenting a story to you, and you don't get to see the whole picture until the end. So give some flexibility there to give them so that they can give you the best presentation they can. And don't forget a scorecard for that presentation. So you have a scorecard, for that RFP and for those features, but you probably need something different for the demonstration so everybody's listening for certain things.
Yep.
Yeah. All right, common things to avoid. One last time, what do you want to leave for tips?
Keep in constant contact with the different vendors. Also, if you do contact them, I think it's best to do a BCC to copy everybody so that you're not giving away everybody's email address and just copying everybody. I've seen responses back to questions where they just show you everybody that was on there. And
that's not a good idea. Don't let them see who all the vendors are.
You kind of want to respect privacy there. Expect to get questions from the vendors. That way, and they're asking the questions because something isn't clear, right? And if something isn't clear, they're wanting that additional information. Answer those questions. Again, you can decide how you want to answer the questions, but you make sure you answer the questions to all the vendors, not just the one that asked the question, just to be fair to everybody. Right. Do expect NDAs for sharing financials from a privately held company. Expect that from them. Don't expect them to just put out there what their financials are. Don't require the RFP to be delivered via hard copy or CD-ROM. I'm one of the very few that does have a CD-ROM on my computer. Most people have laptops now, and CD-ROMs are not part of laptops anymore. They're typically an extra peripheral. Don't expect it to be a CD-ROM. We talked about being able to do it online, or if they are going to send it in, they can email it in. They can send you a USB stick. Most people have USB drives or USB ports available to them. Make it as easy as possible. You can even decide on a Dropbox folder that you want to drop them off to the individual vendors that they can go into and drop it off there. But just, a hard copy and a CD-ROM. One, you're wasting paper with the hard copies. Two, a CD-ROM, it's hard to find a CD writer
anymore. Yeah. So go electronic.
Yeah.
We're in the year 2018.
Yeah. Try to be as fair as possible. Be objective. Be fair to all the vendors. That's why there's RFPs, because you're trying to have a non-biased view towards every vendor, trying to give everybody a fair shot at that, to be your customer, right? You're trying to give them that fair shot. And attach any additional documentations that need to be shared, summary of required documents for the vendor. Give them all the information that they need. Also, on due dates, don't specify a time. People work now, I won't say 24/7, but they work later. They work later than a 3 p.m., right? I've seen people say that they need a hard copy delivered by 2 p.m. on this date. Why?
Yeah.
Just
say end of day.
Right. You're being easy that way.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. The other thing you could think of too is you can say that you will have a dark period after the RFP is submitted, and that you will not be talking to vendors or answering any more questions. Anything you put out to everybody. We are now evaluating. We will have our selection at this time. That's okay to do that.
Yeah.
Instead of if you don't want the salespeople calling you.
Yeah, and one more thing to add as well is communicate to everybody, not just the finalists. No, let me rephrase that. When you make your final selection, communicate to the finalists, obviously, but also communicate to the ones that haven't made it. Mm-hmm. It's just common courtesy to let them know that, hey, you didn't make the final list, mm-hmm. right? And you can leave it at that and move on. If you want to give an explanation, you can give an explanation. But just at least give them the notification that, hey, you didn't make it.
Right, right, exactly. Well, we are out of time, and I don't see any questions. So thank you, John, very much. You know, I think hopefully everybody on the line got some good information from today. So thank you for joining me.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. And thank you, everybody that joined us today. Like I said, this is kind of a fun topic for us because it's not one of our norms, but we thought it would be an interesting one to do just because we see so many different RFPs and we issue RFPs ourselves here, that we thought it would be a great topic to cover because we see so many times that things come in and you're just kind of scratching your head and how is this person going to evaluate all these different vendors based off of this RFP, all right? So thank you again.
Yes. So at the end of today, you're going to get a short survey. It's just a couple questions. Let us know if you'd like to know more about us. At EPAY Systems, again, we are an HR technology provider. We provide workforce management and payroll HR solutions, and we would love to help you. So we actually do have other jobs, and John does demonstrations all the time. So he would love to be able to take you through our system and our full suite of solutions to help folks. Also, afterwards, you will be able to get a copy of the slides. We'll be sending that out, and we'll also be sending you information about an RFP, I guess it's an ebook, that will help you understand how to put an RFP together. So that's a nice follow-up that's coming along, and everybody will get that. So hopefully you'll enjoy that. Again, on the screen here, you can see our full list of solutions, the modules that we have, everything from applicant tracking to HR, benefits, time and labor, payroll, and performance management. Again, at EPAY Systems, we would love to be your partner in providing you your HR technology. Hopefully we can talk to you again. Thanks for your time today. Have a great rest of your day.